In the ancient land of Umuoko, where the sun dipped into the horizon and painted the sky with hues of crimson and gold, villagers lived in constant fear under King Ozara's oppressive rule. The grand palace, with its towering spires and imposing stone walls, overshadowed the simple huts, casting long shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers across the dusty ground. Prostration was mandatory when addressing the king's family, a constant reminder of their subjugation. Ebele, a village elder with lines etched on her face like the rivers that flowed through the land, whispered to her daughter Amaka as they walked in their small garden. Remember, no matter how much it hurts, we must always show respect to the king's family. His wrath is swift and unforgiving, her voice barely audible, as if the king's spies might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on any dissent. Amaka, her voice trembling like the leaves of the nearby trees, replied, "I know, mother, but I'm so tired of the endless suffering. Is there no hope for us?" Her eyes, once bright and full of promise, had dimmed like the stars on a cloudy night. Ebele's eyes, heavy with sorrow, met Amaka's gaze. "Hope is a dangerous thing in Umuoko," she said, her voice laced with caution. "But sometimes, even in the darkest times, a glimmer of light can appear." She paused, glancing around nervously, before adding, "We must be patient and wait for that moment." Within the opulent palace, King Ozala's 3 wives, Ugodia, Ugebedia, and their matriarch, gathered in a secluded chamber. The air was thick with the scent of frankincense and myrrh, and the soft rustle of silk fabrics filled the silence. Ugodia, her voice barely above a whisper, spoke first, her words dripping with urgency. "The spell is working, but Ozara's neglect is becoming a problem. We must remind him of our power." Her eyes darted around the room, ensuring they were alone. Ugebedia frowned, her brow furrowed in concern. "He doesn't listen well when he's too comfortable in his power. We should use the antidote threat to keep him in line." Her voice was laced with a hint of desperation. The matriarch's eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing as she surveyed her daughters. "Let us not forget why we are here," she said, her voice low and commanding. "The spell keeps us in control, but it is our unity that makes it strong. We must wield it wisely." Her words hung in the air, a reminder of the delicate balance of power within the palace walls. As they spoke, the soft murmur of the palace's inhabitants filtered through the chambers, a constant reminder of the world beyond their secluded gathering. The 3 women knew that their words, their actions, and their unity would determine the fate of the kingdom. On the outskirts of Umuoko, where the land stretched towards the horizon and the air was sweet with the scent of ripening crops, Okonta's farm lay in ruins. The king's men, their faces obscured by masks, had left a trail of destruction in their wake. Okonta, his eyes blazing with defiance, confronted them. "Leave my farm at once. You have no right to take what isn't yours." His voice echoed across the desolate landscape, a challenge to the oppressors. The leader of the guards, his sneer a thin line on his face, taunted Okonta. "Your warnings means nothing, farmer. The king's orders are absolute. Resistance will be met with force." He cracked his whip, the sound splitting the air. Okonta's voice, filled with anger and determination, rose above the chaos. "Then you will have to deal with me. I will not let you destroy everything I've worked for." His fists clenched, ready to face the consequences. After being beaten, Okonta's body bore the marks of his defiance, Yet his spirit remained unbroken in a secluded forest where ancient trees whispered secrets to the wind. He met with the wise elders. The air was heavy with the scent of age and wisdom. Elder Chukwudi, his tone somber, spoke words of encouragement. Your suffering is great, but it is your courage that will change the fate of Umuoko. Learn what you can and prepare yourself. His eyes, deep pools of wisdom, bore into Okonta's soul. Okonta, nodding resolutely, accepted the challenge. I will. The spell that binds our people is strong, but I believe it can be broken. I will return ready to fight. His voice, firm and determined, echoed through the forest, a promise of hope. Months later, Okonta returned to Umuoko, his presence commanding attention. He stood before the villagers, his voice clear and commanding, as he issued a stern warning to King Ozala. King Ozala, I give you 7 days to cease your oppression. If you do not comply, there will be consequences. His words hung in the air, a challenge to the status quo. Villager Ifeanyi, hesitant, whispered to Okonta, Are you sure this is wise, Okonta? The king's wrath is terrible. His eyes darted around, fearful of being overheard. Okonta, determined, stood firm. Fear has held us captive for too long. It is time to stand up for our rights. We must act before it is too late. His gaze swept across the crowd, inspiring a glimmer of hope. As the days passed, the villagers debated Okonta's warning in hushed tones. An elderly woman, Nkechi, voiced her concern. Do we truly believe that Okonta's words will change anything? The spell has kept us in check for so long. Her eyes, clouded with doubt, reflected the uncertainty of the villagers. Young man Chike, with a growing sense of hope, countered. Perhaps it is not just about the spell. It is about our will to fight back. If we stand together, we can change our fate. His voice, filled with conviction, inspired a few nods of agreement. Ifeanyi, still worried, cautioned, But what if we fail? We might provoke the king even more. His brow furrowed, weighing the risks and consequences. The villagers' skepticism hung in the air, a testament to the deep-seated fear that had held them captive for so long. By the 5th day of Okonta's warning, the spell's grip weakened, like a threadbare fabric unraveling. Villagers began to recognize their oppression as if awakening from a deep slumber. Ifeanyi, speaking to a group of villagers, his voice filled with conviction, said, Do you remember now? The suffering, the cruelty, it was all part of the king's spell. His eyes scanned the crowd, seeking nods of agreement. Another villager, Adaeze, nodded, her face etched with determination. It's all coming back to me. We have been blind for so long. We must take action before it's too late. Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and resolve. Chike, rallying others, his voice grew louder. Let's gather our strength and prepare. We have to seize this opportunity while we can. He paced among the villagers, his enthusiasm infectious. The truth about King Ozala's rise to power became clear, like a dark cloud dissipating. Elder Chukwudi, addressing the crowd, his voice heavy with sorrow, said, King Ozala's rise was marked by betrayal and murder. He took the throne through bloodshed and deceit. His words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the king's true nature. Okonta, encouraging the villagers, his voice rang out. This truth fuels our cause. We have been oppressed by a murderer. It is our duty to reclaim what is rightfully ours. His gaze swept across the crowd, inspiring a sense of purpose. The villagers' faces, once shrouded in fear, now reflected a growing determination to fight back. The king's guards, once royal only to Ozara, began to express their dissatisfaction with the ongoing oppression. Guard Okwenu, quietly speaking to his fellow guard, Emeka, said, Do you not feel uneasy about what we are doing? The villagers have done nothing to deserve this. His voice was laced with concern, a hint of rebellion brewing. Fellow guard Emeka, troubled, replied, "I do, but what choice do we have? The king's wrath is not something we can easily defy." His eyes darted around, fearful of being overheard. Okwenu, with a hint of rebellion, whispered, "We must find a way to end this. Perhaps there is a way to help the villagers without facing the king's anger." His words hung in the air, a spark of defiance. Leaders from Umuika and Umugbo gathered in a secluded clearing, their faces set with determination. Umuika's chief, Okechukwu, declared, "We have watched Umuoko suffer under Ozara's rule. It is time we acted. Our people are ready to support the rebellion." His voice rang out, a call to action. Umugbo's leader, Ikenna, resolute, nodded in agreement. "We must coordinate our efforts carefully. If we work together, we can break the king's power and restore justice." His eyes locked onto the other leaders, a fierce commitment burning within. Chief Okechukwu, nodding, said, "Let's ensure our forces are prepared. The battle for Umuoko is as much ours as it is theirs." The leaders' faces set in a united determination, a newfound hope for the future of Umuoko. Rebels and their allies gathered at the outskirts of the palace, their faces set with determination. Okonta rallying the rebels, his voice echoed across the landscape. "Today we fight not just for ourselves, but for every person who had suffered under Ozala's rule. Stay united, stay strong." His words ignited a fire within the rebels. Rebel leader Obi, anxious but determined, surveyed the troops. "We have trained for this moment. Let's make sure we don't waste this opportunity. The palace must fall." His eyes locked onto the palace walls, a fierce resolve burning within. Chike to his fellow villagers, his voice filled with conviction. "Keep your courage up. We are not just fighting for survival, we are fighting for our future." The villagers nodded, their faces set with determination. The battle raged on as rebels stormed the palace. Inside the fortress, chaos erupted. Ifeanyi, amidst the chaos, yelled, "Push forward! The palace walls are coming down. We must breach them." His voice was hoarse from shouting, but his spirit remained unbroken. Okonta directing the assault, his voice rang out, "Stay focused! The king must be captured. His reign ends today." His eyes scanned the battlefield, his heart pounding with anticipation. Guard Okwenu turned but resolute to his fellow guards. "Help them. They fight for their freedom, and we can't let our loyalty to the king stop us from doing what's right." His word sparked a chain reaction as more guards defected to the rebel side. The tide of the battle began to shift. King Ozara, once a symbol of fear and oppression, now stood captive before the villagers. His defiance remained even in defeat. "You may have captured me, but my legacy will live on. You cannot erase my rule." His voice dripped with venom, but his eyes betrayed a hint of fear. Okonta confronting him, his voice firm and resolute. "Your legacy is one of tyranny and bloodshed. Today we end that legacy and begin a new chapter for Umuoko." The villagers nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. Villager Adeze to her neighbors, her voice filled with emotion. "We have triumphed over fear. This is the start of our liberation." The villagers erupted in cheers, their joy and relief palpable. A grand pyre, towering high, stood outside the palace, a symbol of the end of an era. The air was heavy with anticipation. The villagers gathered around, their faces somber. Ozala's wife, Ugodia, to the others, her voice laced with resignation, spoke words of acceptance. "We knew this day might come. We should face it with dignity." The other wives nodded, their face set with a mix of fear and acceptance, their eyes downcast. Okonta to the gathered villagers, his voice solemn, a weighty silence preceding his words. This is a moment of justice. Let the flames symbolize the end of our suffering and the dawn of a new era. The villagers nodded, their eyes fixed on the pyre, their hearts filled with a mix of emotions. Elder Chukwudi solemnly, his voice carrying the weight of tradition, spoke words of hope. May this act bring peace to our land and ensure that tyranny never returns. His eyes, filled with a deep wisdom, scanned the crowd as if imploring the ancestors to witness this moment. The pyre was lit, and the flames, like a hungry beast, engulfed the tyrants, consuming their evil deeds and symbolizing the end of their reign of terror. The villagers watched, their faces etched with a mix of relief and trepidation, as the flame danced, purging the land of darkness that had haunted it for so long. Ozala's children, once princes and princesses, now stood as outcasts, their faces etched with shock and despair. Nweze, in disbelief, spoke out. Is this how our reign ends? We were once so powerful. His voice cracked, a mix of anger and sorrow. Okonta, firmly, his expression unyielding, replied, You were complicit in your father's tyranny. Your exile is a small price for the suffering you have caused. His words hung in the air, a stark reminder of their complicity. Akwamaka, tearfully, her eyes downcast, whispered, Perhaps in exile we will find a chance for redemption, but it will be a long road. Her voice, barely audible, a glimmer of hope flickered in her eyes. The rightful heir, exiled during Ozara's reign, was brought back to Umuoko. His presence met with jubilation. The true king, addressing the villagers, his voice filled with compassion, said, I have returned to restore what was stolen. Let us build a future free from tyranny. His eyes scanned the crowd, a warm smile spreading across his face. Okonta, with gratitude, his voice filled with emotion, replied, We fought for this day. We place our trust in you to lead us. The villagers erupted in cheers, their faces filled with hope, as the true king raised his hands, a symbol of unity and new beginnings. Thanks for watching.